The Jordan Show on YouTube.
So today we're going to talk about a fascinating story of industrial evolution. It's about what happens when the massive, power-hungry infrastructure built for one thing, in this case Bitcoin mining, suddenly gets a much richer, much more demanding new tenant knocking on its door. And that new tenant is AI.
This quote just nails it, right? It perfectly sets the stage for what we're seeing. An entire industrial footprint, built to secure what was meant to be peer-to-peer electronic cash, is now being repurposed for something completely different. It's a pivot so big, it's hard to ignore.
You know, to really understand what's happening with Bitcoin and AI, we first have to look back. Because, believe it or not, I've seen this exact same ghost story play out before, just with a different cast of characters. I grew up watching these old lumber mills just die out. The giant log decks got smaller, the smoke from the burners disappeared, and at the exact same time, sometimes right across the street, these anonymous little buildings were popping up. And inside? Well, that's where I was working, writing code for internet service providers. The new economy was literally moving in right next door to the ghost of the old one.
And here's the absolute key to this whole thing. The concrete, the power lines, the roads, they don't care who's using them. They are completely neutral. They just wait for whoever's got the cash to pay the bills. And that is the exact same lens we need to be using when we look at Bitcoin today.
Okay, so let's take that landlord and tenant idea and apply it to Bitcoin. We got to look at what Bitcoin promised to be versus the industrial beast it actually became.
You know, if you go back and actually read the original white paper, it's so simple, almost humble. It was pitched as a basic internet protocol for money, kind of like TCP/IP is for websites or SMTP is for email. Just a neutral, low-friction way to send value.
But that's not really what we built, is it? The reality is, the main Bitcoin network became slow and expensive. It turned out to be amazing for moving huge amounts of value, kind of like shifting gold bars between bank vaults, but just terrible for everyday stuff, like buying a cup of coffee. It's a settlement network, not a payment network.
So the security of this network isn't just about clever code. It's what you could call proof of infrastructure. We're talking a massive, physical, industrial-scale operation of warehouses, power substations, and highly specialized machines. It feels way more industrial than it does financial. And just like those old lumber mills, this infrastructure is now getting attention from a new tenant.
And here comes that new tenant, knocking loud. AI has shown up, and it is starving for the exact same things: massive amounts of power and lots of physical space. But it's a very, very different kind of workload. Okay, so this is a really crucial technical difference. A Bitcoin mine needs an insane amount of power, right? But its internal network is pretty simple. Each machine basically just phones home to a central server and says, hey, I did the work. An AI data center also needs brutal amounts of power, but its machines, its GPUs, are constantly gossiping with each other, sharing enormous chunks of data. For AI, that internal network is just as vital as the main power grid. And then you look at the economics and it becomes a total no-brainer. Bitcoin mining revenue, it's all over the place. It's tied to a volatile asset price and a subsidy that literally gets cut in half every 4 years. AI workloads, on the other hand, come with stable, predictable multi-year contracts that are tied to actual business results. Now, if you're the landlord, which one sounds like the ideal tenant?
And at the end of the day, it really just boils down to this. This isn't some deep philosophical debate about the future of money. It is a simple business decision for the people who own the buildings and the power contracts. The electrons are going to flow to whoever writes the biggest, most reliable check. Simple as that.
And look, this isn't a theory. It's not a what-if scenario. This migration, what people are starting to call the Great Hash Exodus, is already well underway. The evidence is right there in the public earnings reports.
These aren't just a few small players testing the waters. We are talking about the biggest publicly traded Bitcoin miners on the planet. I mean, look at this list. Riot, Core Scientific, Bitfarms, pretty much all the heavy hitters have publicly announced they're diversifying into AI and high-performance computing. They're making the pivot.
And we're not talking about chump change here. These companies have already locked in contracts for AI and HPC workloads worth over $43 billion. That is a massive signal. They're not Bitcoin miners anymore. They're rebranding themselves as power-first infrastructure companies. The hash power is following the money.
So, while these big industrial giants are pivoting to a more profitable business, what's happening back on the Bitcoin network itself? Well, it's starting to show some real signs of stress. Metrics that analysts watch closely, like the hash ribbon, are signaling what's called miner capitulation. It's a fancy term for when it costs more to mine a Bitcoin than the Bitcoin is worth. forcing the little guys to shut off their machines and sell their coins, often at a loss.
So if the biggest, most efficient industrial miners are all becoming AI landlords, what does that mean for Bitcoin? Who or what gets left behind to secure the network?
This is the question for the future of the network, isn't it? If the publicly traded giants are chasing the predictable, juicy contracts from AI, who steps up to fill that security vacuum?
Well, the whole security picture could shift pretty dramatically. We might see a future where the network is secured by a totally new kind of coalition. You could have sovereign states like El Salvador or Bhutan mining for strategic reasons, not just for profit. Then you'll have operations way out in the middle of nowhere, soaking up super cheap, stranded energy. And then you have my favorite group, the hobbyists.
Let me introduce you to the tailings miner. Think of this as the person with some extra solar panels on their roof and an old mining rig humming away in the garage. They're not trying to compete with the big guys. They're just monetizing waste energy, kind of like how ham radio operators use the airways. It's less about quarterly earnings and more about ideology and curiosity. It's a much more resilient, decentralized base.
So, years from now, if you were to walk through a museum and see an exhibit on this era, what would the little plaque say? Maybe the story won't be about a technology that changed the world of money. Maybe it'll be a much older, more familiar story of industrial succession. The story of a grand idea that built a powerful engine only to get outbid for the fuel it needed to run, leaving its most passionate believers to keep the original dream alive, humming away in the quiet corners of the world. The only question is, will that be enough?